My name is Louise. I am 34 years old, and I own Sapphire Luxury Hotels and Elite Catering. You might think that with success like that, my life would be wrapped in silk and safety. But let me tell you, no amount of money or prestige can shield you from betrayal when it comes from the person you least expect. I was the one who made sure my younger brother's dream wedding would happen. I put down a deposit of $65,000 at my finest venue, a gift straight from my heart. I believed in him, in us, in the bond that had carried us since childhood. Yet one ordinary afternoon I received a call that cracked that bond into shards I am not sure will ever fit together again. The voice on the line was calm, professional, almost detached. "Miss Warren, I am calling to inform you that your invitation to the wedding has been canceled. However, the family intends to retain the deposit you provided." For a moment I thought I had misheard. My hand tightened around the phone until my knuckles turned white. Cancelled, retain the deposit. The world tilted and the hallway wall became my only anchor. My brother, the same boy who once split his sandwich with me so I would not go hungry, had agreed to a plan that pushed me out of his wedding while keeping my sacrifice. The humiliation burned deeper than the financial loss. $65,000 was a serious sum, but money can be made again. Respect dignity, the sacred bond between siblings that is not something you can simply earn back with a check. They were telling me that I, his only sister, the woman who had stood beside him through every storm, was no longer welcome. I remember staring at the floor, the words echoing like they were bouncing off empty walls. Cancelled, not required, non-refundable. Each syllable struck harder than the last. I had built an empire on my ability to stay calm under pressure, to negotiate with dignitaries and celebrities, to manage crises without flinching. But this was personal. This was a knife between my ribs, twisted by the very people who should have protected me. And yet, as I stood there trembling with rage and disbelief, something began to shift inside me. I felt it like the flick of a switch, the moment when shock turns into resolve. They thought I was powerless, just a woman in the background, a convenient wallet disguised as family. What they did not know is that the Sapphire Grand was mine, the catering company mine, the hotel rooms booked for their guests mine. They had tried to erase me from the picture, but they had forgotten one thing: I held the frame. That was the moment I decided I would no longer swallow humiliation in silence. For too long I had smiled through insults, tolerated their disdain, and excused my brother's silence. No more. If they wanted war, they had chosen the wrong opponent. Before I continue, let me pause for just a second. Stories like this are not just about weddings gone wrong. They are about boundaries, about what happens when you finally draw a line in the sand and say, "This far, no further." And while you are here listening, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. If you believe family loyalty should never be bought or erased, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you do not miss the rest of this story. Because what unfolded next was not just a wedding disaster. It was the unraveling of everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and self-respect. And it all began with one phone call that told me I was not welcome. Growing up, my brother Daniel and I lived through storms that most children should never have to face. Our parents' marriage ended in a blaze of shouting matches, slammed doors, and broken promises. I was 12. Daniel was 14. That kind of chaos forces children to choose: cling to one another or sink separately. We clung. Our father Richard buried himself in his accounting job. Numbers became his refuge, but to us, he was a ghost with a briefcase. Our mother Laura searched for companionship outside the home, chasing the attention she felt she had been denied. Neither of them understood that their war left us stranded in the middle. They used us as messengers. "Tell your father he is late with child support," or ask your mother if I can pick you up earlier this Sunday. We became the unwilling couriers of resentment. Money was always tight. Mom had been a stay-at-home parent for years, and when she suddenly had to work, her outdated skills made it hard to land a decent job. Dad moved into a small apartment more focused on his new girlfriend than the bills stacking up on our kitchen counter. By the time I turned 16, I was working nights at a local diner, slinging hash browns and refilling coffee cups. Daniel stacked shelves at the grocery store. We would meet in our room after shifts, dump our crumpled bills and coins onto the floor, and count together. "We only have each other," he would whisper, pushing a few extra quarters toward me. "No matter what happens, I've got your back." That vow carried us through high school. While other kids worried about dances and driver's licenses, we worried about rent overdue notices and whether the refrigerator would have anything more than milk inside. But even then, we had moments of light. Daniel would walk me to school every morning, his hand firm on mine at crosswalks. When the boys teased me for being shy, he was the one who stepped in broad-shouldered and fearless. He made sure I never felt small. When I told him I wanted to study hospitality management in college, he never laughed. Instead, he skipped college himself, diving into construction work so he could help me. Month after month, he sent part of his paycheck to cover my textbooks and groceries. It wasn't charity, it was loyalty. His way of proving that our promise wasn't empty words. Sometimes when I close my eyes, I can still see us huddled together on that bedroom floor, coins clinking in our hands, the sound of two kids trying to survive a war they didn't start. We built an alliance stronger than blood forged in hardship. That is why years later the betrayal cut so deep, because the boy who had sworn he would always have my back had once been my anchor. And anchors, when they slip, can drag you under faster than the waves themselves. If you have ever felt like the only one holding your family together, you understand the weight I am describing. It molds you, hardens you, and sometimes it blinds you. I carried that blindness for years, believing Daniel would always choose me, just as I had always chosen him. Looking back, I realized that loyalty built on survival is fragile when tested by status, wealth, and social pressure. We thought we were unbreakable. But as you will soon hear, some cracks form in silence, long before the breaking point comes. Before I go on, let me ask you something. Have you ever been in a position where you and a sibling promised to always protect each other, only to watch that promise crumble? If you have, share it in the comments. Your story might be the reminder someone else needs that they are not alone. By the time I reached my mid-20s, I had already learned that success was never handed to you. It had to be clawed from the edges of exhaustion, carved out of 18-hour days, and fueled by a stubborn refusal to give up. I started at the very bottom of the ladder. My first job was at the front desk of a small boutique hotel. I wore the standard blazer, greeted guests with a smile even when my feet ached, and learned to juggle phone calls, complaints, and reservations all at once. But there was something inside me, a hunger. I wasn't content with just clocking in and clocking out. I wanted to understand how the entire system worked, from the housekeeping schedules to the banquet contracts. I stayed late, shadowed managers, and read every manual I could get my hands on. Within a year, I was promoted to supervisor. Daniel cheered louder than anyone else when I got that promotion. He had chosen a different path, working in construction. By the age of 23, he had become a foreman. Rough hands, sunburned skin, but pride in every beam he placed. And still, even with his own responsibilities, he found ways to support me. Every month, a portion of his paycheck arrived to help cover my textbooks and rent. He insisted it wasn't charity, it was partnership. That partnership became even more important when I made the boldest decision of my life. At 27, I took every cent of my savings, applied for a small business loan, and purchased a failing historic hotel on the verge of foreclosure. The Sapphire Grand was beautiful in bones, but broken in spirit. Leaky pipes, outdated decor, a reputation so poor that even budget travelers avoided it. Everyone told me I was insane. But Daniel, he rolled up his sleeves. On weekends, he brought his construction crew to fix what they could for free. He called in favors, found reliable contractors, and reminded me, "Consider this an investment in our future." Those years nearly broke me. I slept in the office, ate meals from vending machines, and negotiated contracts with eyes bloodshot from lack of rest. Yet slowly, the Sapphire Grand transformed. Crystal chandeliers sparkled again. Guests filled the rooms. By its third year under my ownership, the hotel was profitable. And once the wheel started turning, it didn't stop. I opened a second location, then a third. By 30, I had 5 luxury hotels in my portfolio and launched Elite Catering, a company that specialized in the kind of high-end weddings that graced magazines. Every milestone had Daniel's fingerprints on it. When a pipe burst at my Boston property, he drove 3 hours in the dead of night to oversee emergency repairs. When I landed my first corporate contract, he celebrated like it was his own. We had built something monumental, not just businesses, but a legacy that rose out of the ashes of our chaotic childhood. I can still picture the pride in his eyes when I showed him the Sapphire Grand's ballroom after the final renovation. "You did this," he said, but I corrected him. "We did this." And that's why years later, when he began to slip away from me, it felt like betrayal wasn't just personal. It was a betrayal of everything we had built together. It was like watching the foundation of our shared empire start to crumble one crack at a time. But before that storm arrived, there was light. There was triumph. There was proof that 2 kids who once counted coins on their bedroom floor could build empires if they stood shoulder to shoulder. I often wonder if that is why I fought so hard later when Melissa entered his life. I wasn't just defending my place as a sister, I was defending the years of sacrifice, the loyalty that had turned into brick and stone chandeliers and contracts. Losing Daniel to someone else's influence felt like losing half of my story. And here's something I want to ask you. Have you ever worked side by side with someone you love, only to feel them drift into another world, one where you no longer belong? Share that in the comments, because those stories matter. They remind us we're not alone in watching bonds stretch thin. Because the truth is, success can build walls just as quickly as it builds bridges. And the higher we climbed, the more fragile that bridge became. I first met Melissa on what should have been an ordinary afternoon. My catering company had been contracted to serve lunch at a charity golf tournament. I was in my element, checking presentation trays, greeting donors, making sure every detail reflected the Sapphire brand. That was when Daniel walked in with her. She was striking perfectly dressed, every strand of hair in place. She moved like she belonged to a different world, and maybe she did. She smiled at me, but it never reached her eyes. "So you're the little sister who works in hotels?" she said, her voice coated with politeness that felt more like condescension. The way she lingered on the word little made my stomach twist. I laughed it off, reminding myself that first impressions weren't everything. But even then, something about her felt wrong. Melissa came from old money. Her father owned a chain of luxury car dealerships across the Northeast. Her mother sat on the boards of several cultural foundations. They weren't just wealthy, they were connected. They lived in a circle where names opened doors, where bloodlines mattered more than effort. And at first, Daniel looked happier than I had seen him in years. He was swept up in her world, lavish dinners, private clubs, evenings where wine was poured without ever checking the price tag. But as the weeks passed, I began to notice small changes. He stopped driving the pickup truck that had been his pride for years and replaced it with a luxury SUV he could barely afford. He began using phrases like the right people and our kind of establishments. I watched him slip further away from the man who had once worked double shifts to help me buy textbooks. The man who counted coins with me on our bedroom floor now laughed at jokes made at the expense of the working class. It wasn't just Daniel. Melissa and her mother Eleanor made no secret of their disdain for me. At Daniel's birthday dinner, Eleanor turned to me with a smile that didn't hide the steel beneath. "Tell me about your little hotel business," she asked. Her tone suggested it was nothing more than a hobby. When I explained the scale of my operations, she sighed. "Well, I suppose anyone can succeed in America these days." Melissa joined in, shuddering delicately as she said, "It must be exhausting working in service. All those complaints and dirty rooms, I could never." The words cut deep. I had spent years building an empire of service, an empire I was proud of. Service wasn't weakness, it was strength. It was the art of making people feel valued. Yet to them, it was something dirty beneath them. Daniel noticed my silence and added, "Natalie has always been a hard worker. She'll probably sell the business once she settles down and starts a family." He said it as though my drive, my passion, were a flaw that needed fixing. That night I lay awake replaying the conversation. How had the brother who once stood at my side defending me against the world now spoken about me like I was an embarrassment? I wanted to believe it was just a phase, that he was simply dazzled by Melissa's world, that once the newness wore off, he would return to himself. But deep down I knew the boy who once promised we would always have each other was vanishing behind her carefully painted smile. And yet, despite everything, I loved him. I told myself to endure it, to be patient, to believe that beneath the suits, the dinners, the polished friends, the real Daniel was still there. Let me ask you something while I pause here. Have you ever watched someone you love change so much for another person that you barely recognize them anymore? Did you hold on, or did you let go? Share your story below. Because that was the place I found myself in, standing on the edge of a widening gap, reaching for a brother who no longer seemed to see me. And the further he stepped into Melissa's world, the closer we crept to the storm that would break everything apart. When Daniel called me one crisp autumn evening, his voice carried a tremor I had not heard in years. She said, "Yes, Nat," he blurted, barely able to contain his excitement. Melissa agreed to marry me. For a moment my chest filled with warmth. Despite every misgiving, despite every uneasy glance Melissa had ever shot my way, I felt genuine joy for him. "That's wonderful news," I told him, curling up on my sofa. "Tell me everything. How did you propose?" He described an elaborate evening at the Blake family's summer home in the Hamptons. A private chef, a string quartet, thousands of rose petals scattered across the sand, and a diamond ring that cost him 6 months of savings. It sounded more like a scene from a movie than the Daniel I once knew, the man who used to patch drywall with calloused hands and laugh at the idea of fancy dinners. Still, I congratulated him. "It sounds perfect," I said, swallowing the knot in my throat. Then came the hesitation. "Melissa wants a June wedding," he admitted. "Her mother says the best venues are already booked, and the ones available are far beyond our budget." I knew exactly what that meant. He was terrified of not measuring up. "What about the Sapphire Grand?" I suggested gently. "The ballroom holds 300 guests. The gardens are stunning in June. And since I own it, you'll have every advantage: discounts, priority dates, flexibility." There was silence on the line. Finally, Daniel sighed. "I don't know, Nat. Melissa has her heart set on Rosewood or the Peninsula." I pressed on. The Sapphire Grand was just ranked above both in Luxury Travel magazine. It's not just good enough, it's better. 3 days later he called back. "Melissa will consider it. But she wants to tour first, and she's worried about the catering. Her mother knows celebrity chefs." I forced a smile into my voice. "Elite catering can handle anything she dreams up. We have 2 Michelin-trained chefs. Trust me, Daniel. We can make this wedding unforgettable. The tour was excruciating. Melissa and Eleanor walked through the ballroom whispering to each other, their eyes darting like critics searching for flaws. Eleanor conceded the space was adequate, but sniffed that the color scheme clashed with Melissa's vision. She suggested reupholstering 200 chairs and replacing the draperies. I offered alternatives, chair covers, decor adjustments, but Melissa pursed her lips. Mother, maybe we should keep looking at rosewood. Daniel looked at me with pleading eyes, the same eyes he used when we were children, and he begged me to compromise just to keep the peace. With a deep breath, I asked Melissa to show me her Pinterest board. Let's find solutions together, I said, forcing kindness into my tone. That opened the floodgates. She laid out a royal wedding fantasy, imported flowers, a champagne fountain, custom lighting, and a 10-tier cake. When my manager presented the preliminary estimate, Daniel's face drained of color. Even with my owner's discount, the bill soared past $100,000. That was when I made a decision that would alter the course of everything. As my gift to you both, I said quietly, I'd like to cover the venue and catering deposit. $65,000 toward your special day. Daniel shook his head instantly. Nat, that's too much. We can't accept that. But Melissa's eyes lit up. She looked at her mother and they exchanged the faintest smile. That would be lovely, she said quickly. We accept. I felt my heart lurch, but I nodded. Even for me, $65,000 was significant months of profit gone in a single stroke. Yet I told myself it was worth it. Worth it for my brother. Worth it for peace. Maybe even worth it to build a fragile bridge to my new family. I signed the paperwork myself, ensuring the deposit covered the ballroom, basic catering, and hotel suites for the wedding party. In that moment, I believed I had secured not only Daniel's happiness, but also my place in his new world. If you are listening now, let me ask, would you have done the same? Would you have poured out $65,000, knowing the bride's family looked down on you simply because you loved your sibling? Share your thoughts in the comments. I wonder how many of you would have drawn the line earlier than I did. Because love can make you generous, but blind love can make you vulnerable. And I had just opened a door that Melissa and Eleanor would gladly walk through, taking more than I ever imagined. 3 months before the wedding, I found myself waiting for an invitation that never came. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe there was a delay with the printer. Maybe it had gotten lost in the mail. After all, I had personally signed the deposit of $65,000 that guaranteed their dream venue. Surely my place at the celebration was beyond question. But doubt has a way of gnawing at you in the quiet moments. My cousin Dana called one evening, her voice bubbling with excitement. Nat, the invitations are stunning, she gushed. Gold foil embossed lettering, even a handwritten note from Melissa. You must have spent a fortune. My stomach clenched. You received yours? I asked, forcing steadiness into my tone. Of course, she said brightly. Didn't you? I hung up with a polite excuse, my heart sinking like a stone. I tore through the stack of mail on my counter, electric bills, catalogs, bank statements, but no invitation. I checked again the next day. Still nothing. I tried to give Daniel the benefit of the doubt. When we spoke on the phone, I casually asked, So, when should I expect my invitation? He hesitated. Melissa handled the guest list. I'm sure yours is on the way. His vagueness was like static in my ears. Another month passed. No envelope arrived. What did arrive were whispers on social media. Photos of the bridal shower tables draped in blush linens. Melissa beaming in white, surrounded by friends and family. Except I wasn't there. Then came engagement photos at the botanical gardens. Daniel, in a tailored suit, Melissa glowing at his side, both sets of parents smiling in the background. Again, I was absent. I confronted my events coordinator during a routine meeting at the hotel. Can I see the seating chart? I asked casually. She hesitated, shifting in her chair. Finally, she pulled out the file. My eyes darted over the page once, twice. My name wasn't there. This has to be a mistake, I whispered. Her expression told me otherwise. Miss Blake was very specific, she admitted quietly. She reviewed the chart multiple times herself. The words hit like a hammer. The bride-to-be who had so eagerly accepted my $65,000 had erased me completely from her vision of the perfect day. And still I held on to denial. I told myself there had to be a misunderstanding. Maybe Melissa overlooked something. Maybe Daniel didn't know. Deep down I was terrified of what the truth meant, that my brother had allowed this. The breaking point came at a family dinner 1 month before the ceremony. Both my parents, usually too stubborn to be in the same room together, attended. Daniel and Melissa arrived with Eleanor, all polished smiles and rehearsed charm. I tried to relax, telling myself this was the moment we'd smooth everything over. But the tension crackled like electricity. Whenever I asked about wedding details, the conversation shifted abruptly. Melissa would whisper to Eleanor, then change the subject. When dessert came, Eleanor swirled her wine and said with a knowing smile, "A wedding is not just a celebration. It is a statement about your place in society." Melissa leaned forward, her voice dripping with superiority. Some people simply don't understand the social implications of a high-profile event. Running hotels is one thing. Appreciating true elegance is another. Their eyes flicked toward me. My father tried to laugh it off. My mother tried to defend me. But the message was unmistakable. I was not one of them. And Daniel, my brother, the boy who once swore he would always protect me, sat silently staring at his plate. That silence cut deeper than any insult. Because silence, when it comes from someone you love, is its own form of betrayal. So I'll ask you this. Have you ever realized you were being written out of a story you helped pay for? That everyone else received their invitation to the table except you? If you have, drop a comment below. Your story might remind someone else that exclusion often says more about the people doing it than about those left out. Because by then, the truth was undeniable. I wasn't just being forgotten, I was being deliberately erased. And the storm that followed would make that erasure impossible to ignore. The family dinner was supposed to bring us together. Instead, it split the last fragile threads holding me and Daniel close. The restaurant was upscale with chandeliers casting golden light across polished tables. Both my parents were there, a rare occurrence since their divorce, sitting stiffly trying to appear cordial. Melissa and her mother arrived dressed like they were stepping out of a fashion magazine. Daniel looked nervous, tugging at his cufflinks. From the moment we sat down, the atmosphere was taut like a violin string pulled too tight. Small talk felt forced. When I asked about the rehearsal dinner, Melissa gave vague answers before glancing at Eleanor, who smoothly changed the subject. I sipped my wine, waiting for someone to include me, but the wall of exclusion was obvious. Then came Eleanor's performance. She leaned back in her chair, swirling her glass as though she were lecturing a class on refinement. "It is so important to have the right atmosphere at a wedding," she declared. "The proper guests, the right connections. A wedding is not merely a celebration, it is a statement of status." Melissa nodded, her smile sharp. Some people simply don't understand the weight of social events. Running hotels is one thing, but appreciating true elegance, that is entirely different. Their eyes settled on me. My cheeks burned, but I kept my voice steady. The Sapphire Grand has hosted diplomats and celebrities. I think we understand elegance well enough. Eleanor patted my hand with mock sympathy. "Yes, dear. But there is a difference between serving the elite and being one of them." The table went silent. My mother stiffened beside me, her eyes flashing. My father chuckled awkwardly, trying to diffuse the tension, but the insult had landed. They weren't subtle anymore. To them, I was the help, nothing more. I looked at Daniel. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He busied himself cutting his steak, pretending not to notice. That silence sliced deeper than Eleanor's words. He knew what she meant. He knew it was cruel. And he said nothing. My mother finally spoke, her voice trembling with anger. Natalie has been more than generous. She gave $65,000 to make this wedding possible. The venue looks stunning because of her. Melissa's response was swift. Yes, the arrangement has been helpful, though we have had to make substantial upgrades to bring the space up to standard. The audacity left me breathless, the sapphire grand. My pride, my empire, dismissed as substandard by a woman who had never worked a day in her life. My jaw tightened, but I refused to break in front of them. After dessert, I tried to speak with Daniel privately. As I reached for his arm, Melissa intercepted, her voice honeyed, but her eyes triumphant. Daniel, darling, we need to discuss the rehearsal dinner with Daddy. She whisked him away, leaving me standing there like an intruder in my own family. That night I lay awake replaying every moment. Eleanor's sneer, Melissa's smirk, Daniel's silence. For the first time, I wondered if the brother who once held my hand across crosswalks had been replaced entirely. Have you ever sat at a table where everyone was smiling, but you knew the smiles weren't for you? Where the laughter excluded you, the conversation skirted around you, and the person you loved most refused to defend you? If you've ever lived through that, leave a comment. Let others know they're not alone in being silenced by the very people who should have lifted them up. Because that dinner wasn't just a meal, it was a message. And the message was clear: in their world I didn't belong. And Daniel, my own brother, was willing to let them decide that for him. The confirmation of my exclusion came not from an invitation that never arrived, but from whispered cruelty overheard in a country club lounge. A friend of mine, a server who had worked countless events at the Blake family's club, called me one evening. Her voice trembled with both anger and pity. Natalie, you need to know what Melissa said about you. I gripped the phone tighter. What did she say? She was laughing with her bridesmaids. She called you the hotel girl who actually thinks she'll be sitting at the family table. Then she added, as if we'd want her front and center in the photos, but we need to keep her happy until the wedding since she controls the venue. The words echoed in my ears, but it wasn't over. My friend hesitated, then whispered, one of the bridesmaids asked about the $65,000 you gave them. Melissa laughed. She said, that money is already spent. What's she going to do, ask for it back? Daniel says she's loaded, she'll get over it. I hung up slowly, my heart pounding. Rage coursed through me, but underneath it was grief so heavy it nearly buckled my knees. I had written a check not just for a wedding deposit, but apparently for my own erasure. I dialed Daniel immediately, my hands shaking. When he answered, his voice was tired, strained. Nat. Am I invited to your wedding or not? I demanded. My voice cracked, but I forced strength into it. Because I'm hearing things, Daniel, things that say Melissa never planned to include me. There was silence, then a sigh. It's complicated. Complicated. That word felt like a dagger. No, it isn't, I snapped. I gave you $65,000. I offered you my venue, my staff, my name. And now your fiancé is telling people I won't even be allowed to sit at the table. Melissa and her family move in important circles, he said finally, his voice defensive. This wedding could open doors for us both. You don't understand the pressure I'm under. Pressure, I repeated, stunned. Since when did you care about impressing strangers? What happened to the brother who once told me we only had each other? His tone hardened. People grow up, Natalie. They change. Maybe you should try it instead of clinging to the past. My throat closed. Is that Melissa talking or you? I whispered. This conversation isn't productive, he said coldly. I have to go. We have an appointment with the florist. The line went dead. I sat in the dark for hours, staring at nothing. The boy who once handed me his last sandwich, who once whispered promises over piles of coins in our bedroom, was gone. In his place was a man who valued status over blood. The betrayal was no longer silent. It was spoken, deliberate, cemented in his choice to stand by Melissa's side as she mocked me. Tell me, have you ever discovered the truth about someone you love? Not from their own lips, but from whispers meant to humiliate you? Drop your thoughts in the comments because there are so many of us who've learned the hardest lessons secondhand. That night I wrote Daniel a long email. I poured out our history, our bond, every sacrifice I had made. I told him how deeply it hurt to be erased. I promised I would still make sure the wedding was perfect, because that's what family does. His reply was short, almost corporate. Thank you for understanding. I'll discuss the guest list with Melissa. No apology, no reassurance, just distance. And I realized then that the next blow was coming harder, sharper. I just didn't know yet that it would arrive through a stranger's voice on the other end of the phone. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in the middle of a budget meeting with my executive team, surrounded by spreadsheets and financial projections. My phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. Normally, I would have ignored it, but something in my chest told me to pick up. "Hello, this is Natalie Warren," I answered, stepping into the hallway. The voice on the other end was crisp, professional, detached. "Miss Warren, this is Victoria Hayes, the wedding planner for the Warren Blake ceremony at the Sapphire Grand. I'm calling regarding your deposit of $65,000. My pulse quickened. "Yes, is there a problem with the payment?" A pause, then words that dropped like stones into my stomach. "Not exactly. I have been instructed to inform you that your invitation to the wedding has been canceled. However, the family would like to retain the deposit for the venue and catering." The world tilted. I pressed a hand against the wall for balance. "Excuse me?" My voice was barely a whisper. "The family has revised the guest list," she continued. "Your attendance is no longer required, but the event will proceed at your venue with the deposit you've already provided." My breath caught in my throat. Which family gave this instruction? Miss Blake and her mother Victoria said quietly. They assured me Mr. Warren was aware and in agreement. Daniel, my brother, he had agreed. Images flashed through my mind, the two of us counting quarters on the bedroom floor, his voice promising, "We only have each other." Now he had sold me out for a seat at Melissa's table. I forced myself to ask, "And the reason?" Another pause. Victoria's tone softened, almost apologetic. "Miss Blake expressed concerns that your professional connection to the venue might confuse guests. She felt there was a risk of you being perceived as staff rather than family. She also mentioned family dynamics that could distract from the atmosphere." Staff, not family. My chest burned with fury. Years of sweat and sacrifice reduced to a caricature of service. My empire, my hotels, my catering company used as justification to exile me from the very event I was funding. "Let me be clear," I said, my voice cold now. "The bride and her mother want to exclude me from my own brother's wedding, but keep $65,000 of my money." "That is correct," Victoria said, her words clipped, uncomfortable. I closed my eyes, and in that silence something snapped. Shock turned to clarity. Rage sharpened into resolve. They thought I was powerless, just a checkbook with no voice. But they had forgotten who owned the Sapphire Grand. "Victoria," I said slowly, "you may deliver a message for me. Unless I receive a formal apology and a reinstated invitation by 5 o'clock today, the Sapphire Grand will no longer be available for this event. All deposits will be forfeited as per the contract." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. "Miss Warren, surely you don't mean—" "I do," I interrupted. "Section 12 of your contract allows me to cancel any event that violates the core values of my company, respect and integrity. Excluding the venue owner while keeping her money qualifies." Victoria stammered. "But the guests, the deposits with other vendors?" "It is unfortunate timing," I said coolly. "But I have been pushed past my limit. Deliver the message." I hung up and stood there in the empty hallway, my heart pounding. For months I had endured their insults, tolerated their games, and excused my brother's silence. But this was different. This was theft dressed in silk. If you've ever had to draw a line in the sand, if you've ever realized that the only way to protect yourself was to stop being quiet, then you know the power of that moment. Tell me, would you have done what I did, or would you have swallowed the insult to keep peace? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because this is where the story turns. Because I had just lit the fuse, and in 10 days a wedding that was supposed to be the grandest event of the season was about to explode. By 4:30 that afternoon, my inbox was overflowing, my office phone rang nonstop, and my cell phone buzzed with desperate calls. I ignored them all. The fuse I had lit with Victoria's phone call was burning fast, and I knew the explosion would arrive before the day was done. At exactly 4:55, the Sapphire Grand lobby erupted with commotion. My assistant hurried into my office wide-eyed. "They're here," she whispered. "Your brother Melissa, her parents, everyone. They're demanding to see you." I smoothed my blazer, forced my pulse to steady, and instructed her to escort them not to my office but to the private conference room. This wasn't a family gathering anymore. It was business, and I intended to keep it that way. When I entered the room, the air felt electric with tension. Melissa's face was blotched red, her mascara smudged with tears. Eleanor looked ready to snap, her lips drawn tight as piano wire. Daniel stood stiffly, his jaw clenched, his eyes avoiding mine. My parents hovered at the back, confused and uncomfortable. And then there was Howard Blake, Melissa's father, looming with the quiet confidence of a man used to getting his way. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Daniel barked the moment I shut the door. His voice cracked with a mixture of anger and fear. I clasped my hands calmly in front of me, enforcing the contract, and standing up for myself finally. Howard stepped forward, his broad frame dominating the space. "This is outrageous. We have a binding agreement. You cannot simply cancel a wedding with 10 days' notice." I met his gaze without flinching. "Actually, I can. Section 12 of the venue contract gives me the right to cancel any event that violates our ethical standards. Attempting to exclude the venue owner while keeping her financial contribution qualifies as fraud." Melissa shot up from her chair, her voice shrill. "We didn't exclude you, we revised the guest list, that's all." By removing only me, I asked coldly, "The sister who gave you $65,000, the sister who owns this hotel?" Victoria, the wedding planner, had been standing silently in the corner. Now she straightened, her voice firm. "I followed Miss Blake's instructions precisely. I was told to inform Miss Warren that her invitation was rescinded, but the deposit would remain." Eleanor waved her hand dismissively. "This is a misunderstanding. Guest lists are complicated. Mistakes happen." "No," I said evenly, "this was deliberate. And it ends today." Melissa snapped, her composure crumbling. "You offered that money as a gift. Gifts don't come with conditions." "Actually," I replied, my voice like steel, "gifts often come with meaning. And this one was tied to family, something you clearly don't understand. You accepted my generosity while plotting to humiliate me. That isn't a gift. That's exploitation," Howard growled, pulling out his phone. "I'll call my attorney. We'll sue you for breach of contract." "You're welcome to try," I countered. "But the contract is airtight. I also have evidence of intent to defraud me, witnesses who overheard your daughter bragging about taking my money while excluding me. That's a stronger legal case than yours." The room fell into stunned silence. My father, usually oblivious, finally found his voice. "Daniel, is this true? Did you agree to exclude your sister?" Daniel shifted, his eyes flicking between Melissa and me. "It's complicated," he muttered. "No," I said firmly. "It's simple. Either I'm welcome at my brother's wedding as family, or there is no wedding at the Sapphire Grand." Melissa burst into tears. "You can't do this. Everything is arranged, the flowers, the band, the guests flying in from Europe." "I can," I replied, "and I will. Unless there's an apology and a reinstated invitation, this event is over. For the first time, Howard looked rattled. He turned to me, his voice calmer. What exactly do you want, Miss Warren? Respect, I said clearly. A sincere apology. An acknowledgement that what you did was wrong. And a guarantee that I will be treated as family, not staff at this wedding. Eleanor hissed. This is extortion. No, I corrected her. This is a boundary. And for the first time in months, I felt the ground shift back beneath my feet. Now let me ask you, what would you have done in that conference room? Would you have caved to keep peace? Or would you have drawn the line the way I did? Share it in the comments, because lines like these change everything. What I didn't know then was that my brother's silence was about to crack. And when it did, it would change the course of the wedding and our lives forever. The conference room had fallen into uneasy silence after I drew my boundary. My words lingered in the air like smoke, heavy, undeniable. Daniel sat slumped in his chair, his hands clenched into fists, his eyes fixed on the carpet as though the pattern could shield him from reality. Melissa sniffled beside him, crocodile tears streaking her mascara. Eleanor's jaw tightened, her fury barely restrained. I looked at them all and realized this wasn't just about a wedding. This was about power, respect, and the willingness to be treated as less than human for the sake of appearances. And for the first time in months, I refused to bow. Howard cleared his throat, trying to restore some control. Miss Warren, he said with forced calm, surely we can negotiate without ultimatums. My family is not accustomed to being treated this way. I met his gaze steadily. Neither am I. Yet here we are. Melissa shot to her feet. You don't understand, this is my wedding. I should decide who is there. If I don't want you in the pictures, that's my choice. I stood as well, my voice unwavering. No, Melissa. You don't get to erase me while pocketing $65,000 of my money. You don't get to mock me as the hotel girl while using my property to impress your friends. That stops now. My mother surprised me then. She rose from her chair and came to stand at my side. Her voice trembled but was firm. I agree with Natalie. This what you planned is shameful. James, I raised you better than this. My father, usually detached, added quietly, she's right. The air shifted. For the first time, Melissa and Eleanor didn't look so certain. Their expressions faltered, replaced by flashes of doubt. I turned my attention to Daniel. You've been silent long enough. Tell them. Tell me. Did you agree to exclude me from your wedding? His head jerked up, his eyes flashing with guilt. He opened his mouth, closed it again. Finally, he whispered, It's complicated. No, it's simple, I said, my voice cutting through the tension. Either I'm your sister, the same sister who worked nights to help buy groceries, who supported you through every step of your career, or I'm nothing. And if I'm nothing, then you don't get my venue, my catering, or my money. Daniel flinched as though I'd struck him. Melissa leaned closer to him, hissing, Don't let her manipulate you. This is your chance to prove you belong in our world. But for the first time in a long time, I saw something flicker in Daniel's eyes. A memory maybe of who we once were, two kids huddled on a bedroom floor counting coins and whispering promises. Victoria, the wedding planner, broke the silence with an uncharacteristic boldness. I was instructed by Miss Blake to rescind Natalie's invitation. I did not mishear. I did not invent it. That was the instruction. Daniel's face went pale. He looked at me, at Melissa, at the planner, then back down. His voice was barely audible. I never wanted to hurt you, Nat. But you did, I said softly. You hurt me the moment you stayed silent while they mocked me. You hurt me when you let Melissa treat me like staff in my own hotel. And you hurt me most by forgetting the vow we made that we only had each other. The room went still. This wasn't just about business anymore. It wasn't even about money. It was about betrayal and survival, about whether Daniel would continue to drown in Melissa's shadow or remember who he used to be. And as I looked around the table, I knew we were balanced on the edge of a blade. One more word, one more choice could cut everything apart. Before I go on, let me ask you, have you ever stood in a room where you demanded the respect you deserved, knowing the people across from you might choose their pride over the truth? Leave your answer in the comments, because those moments define us. Because that night in that conference room, Daniel's silence was finally breaking, and what he said next would tip the scales forever. Daniel's voice cracked like glass when he finally spoke. "I never wanted to hurt you, Nat. I thought—" He paused, rubbing his temples. "I thought you'd understand that sometimes sacrifices have to be made for the bigger picture." I stared at him, disbelief flooding my chest, and I was the sacrifice. My voice was steady, but it carried the weight of every sleepless night, every insult I had endured from Melissa and Eleanor. Daniel had no answer. His silence was its own confession. Howard shifted in his seat, clearly trying to steer the conversation back to control. "Let's be practical. Miss Warren, if we agree to include you in the wedding, will you allow the event to proceed?" I didn't answer him. I turned directly to my brother. "Daniel, do you want me there? Or am I just an obligation to be tolerated?" The room went still. Melissa's eyes blazed as if daring him to say the wrong thing. Eleanor's lips pressed tighter. My parents leaned forward, holding their breath. Daniel finally looked at me, and for the first time in months, I saw a flicker of the brother I once knew. "I want you there," he whispered. "I always did. I just lost myself." Melissa shot to her feet, slamming her hand on the table. "This is my wedding, I decide who attends. And after this stunt, you still want her there. She just threatened to destroy everything." Daniel rose slowly, his shoulders squaring. "It's our wedding, Melissa, and she's my sister. She deserves to be there." His voice cracked, but he didn't waver. "You tried to erase her, and I let you. That was wrong." Melissa's face twisted with rage. "You're choosing her over me." He looked at her for a long moment, then said quietly, "I'm choosing what's right." For once, Melissa was speechless. Eleanor sputtered, "This is absurd. You're letting her manipulate you with ultimatums." I stepped in before the moment slipped away. "No, Eleanor. I'm not manipulating anyone. I'm protecting myself. For months I've bent over backwards, given money, given respect, given patience. In return, I've been mocked, excluded, and betrayed. That ends here." The room erupted with overlapping voices, Melissa crying, Eleanor hissing about reputations, Howard muttering about damages. But above it all, my brother's voice rang out with new strength. "Enough, Natalie is my sister. She stays." The silence that followed was deafening. I took a breath and set my terms clearly. Here's what will happen. 1. I receive a written apology from both the bride and the groom. 2. I will be treated as family, not staff at every event. 3. My contribution of $65,000 will be acknowledged publicly in the program as a gift from a loving sister. If these terms are not met, the Sapphire Grand is closed to you. Howard leaned back, nodding slowly. "Those terms are reasonable." Melissa gasped. "Father—" "Enough, Melissa," Howard snapped, surprising us all. "She's right. What you and your mother attempted was disgraceful. We're lucky she's willing to negotiate at all." Eleanor looked like she'd swallowed poison, but she stayed silent. My parents exchanged a look of quiet relief. And Daniel, he looked at me with something I hadn't seen in far too long. Gratitude. He swallowed hard. "I'm sorry, Nat. I should have never let things get this far." It wasn't enough to erase the pain, but it was a start. That night, as they left the conference room, Daniel lingered. He turned to me, eyes wet. "I don't know who I've been these past few months. But thank you for not giving up on me even when I didn't deserve it." I touched his arm softly. "That's what real family does. The kind that values loyalty over appearances." He nodded, and for the first time I allowed myself to hope. Because though the battle wasn't over, the tide had finally turned. And yet deep in my chest, a question still lingered. Would he truly find his way back to himself before the wedding day? Or would Melissa drag him under once more? Before I continue, let me tease what comes next. Weddings have a way of exposing truths that can't be hidden. And when the ceremony finally began, Daniel made a choice no one saw coming. The days leading up to the wedding were a blur of tense negotiations and rehearsed smiles. Outwardly, everything seemed back on track. Behind the scenes, though, every interaction felt like walking across cracked ice. Melissa delivered her written apology, though stiff and clearly drafted under her father's pressure. Daniel's letter, in contrast, was raw and heartfelt. He admitted his failures, confessed how deeply he had lost himself, and promised to make things right. I read his words like late at night, alone, in my office, and for the first time in months, I believed the brother I once knew was still there. Victoria Hayes, the wedding planner who had once been the bearer of my humiliation, began treating me with a newfound respect. I must apologize again, she told me as we finalized seating charts. Had I known who you truly were, I never would have agreed to deliver that message. I see now how wrong it was. You were doing your job with the information you had, I told her. But in the future, if a client ever asks you to exclude a sibling while keeping their money, question it. She gave a rueful smile. Lesson learned. The rehearsal dinner was my first public test. The moment I walked into the private dining room, conversations dipped. Eyes flicked toward me, some with curiosity, others with judgment. Melissa sat stiffly beside Daniel, her smile brittle. Eleanor avoided me altogether. But Howard surprised me. He approached with a hand extended. I want to personally apologize for the way things were handled, he said. In business, I've always respected directness and integrity. You displayed both. Thank you, I replied, shaking his hand firmly. I appreciate that. Throughout the night, I caught Daniel watching Melissa with a strange expression. Outwardly, she was the perfect bride, gracious, poised, commanding the room. But when attention drifted, her mask slipped. She snapped at servers, whispered sharp criticisms, and shot icy looks at guests who didn't flatter her enough. Later, I stepped out onto the terrace for air. Daniel followed, slipping beside me at the railing. For a moment, we just looked at the city lights. Then he said quietly, "You look beautiful tonight, Nat." "Thank you. It's a lovely evening," I replied, giving him space to speak. He sighed. "Do you remember when we used to sit on Mom's fire escape planning our futures? You wanted a little bed and breakfast with a garden. I wanted to build skyscrapers." I laughed softly. Life turned out differently. Better in some ways, he admitted. Then his voice dropped. "But I keep thinking about what you said, about being true to myself. I don't know if I am." I turned to him carefully. "What do you mean?" Everything with Melissa happened so fast. At first, it felt like being admitted into a world I never thought I could touch. But now... He shook his head. "Now I'm hiding on a terrace during my own rehearsal dinner, wondering if I'm making the biggest mistake of my life." I swallowed hard. Cold feet are normal. "This feels like more than cold feet," he confessed. "It's the way she treats people when no one's watching. The way she pressures me to change everything, how I dress, how I speak, who I spend time with. I don't feel like me anymore." Before I could answer, Melissa's voice cut across the night. "There you are," she called, her eyes narrowing at the sight of us together. "The Harringtons are leaving. They came all the way from London. Don't you think it's rude to disappear?" Daniel straightened, slipping his mask back on. "Just getting some air with Natalie. We'll be right in." Melissa's gaze lingered on me like a blade. Then she turned sharply and disappeared inside. Daniel let out a shaky laugh. "See what I mean?" I touched his arm gently. "Whatever you decide, I'll support you. That's what real family does." He nodded, but the haunted look in his eyes didn't fade. "If you're listening now, let me ask, have you ever watched someone stand on the edge of a decision that could change their entire life, marriage, career, identity, and you wanted to scream the answer, but knew they had to choose for themselves? Share your stories below. Because standing on that terrace, I knew something had shifted. The cracks in Daniel's certainty were widening, and when the wedding day came, those cracks would shatter. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and flawless, the kind of June day brides dream about. The sapphire grand glowed under a canopy of flowers, white roses, orchids, and ivy twined across every arch and chandelier. My staff moved like clockwork, every detail polished to perfection. Despite the chaos of the past weeks, I had kept my word. The venue was breathtaking. I dressed in a gown that was elegant but unassuming, deep navy silk that marked me as family, not staff. As I took my place in the front row, I felt the weight of Eleanor's glare, but Howard gave me a small nod of acknowledgement. My parents sat close, their hands folded tightly, bracing for what was to come. The music swelled. Daniel stood at the altar in his tuxedo, handsome but visibly tense. His jaw was tight, his shoulders stiff. I watched him closely, my stomach knotted with dread. When the bridal march began, Melissa appeared at the end of the aisle on her father's arm. Gasps rippled through the crowd. She was stunning in her custom gown, every detail screaming wealth and status. The ceremony unfolded smoothly at first. The minister's voice rose and fell with practiced calm. Vows were exchanged, rings gleamed under the chandeliers. And then came the moment that would unravel everything. If anyone here can show just cause why these two should not lawfully be joined in matrimony, let them speak now or forever hold their peace. The room went still. For a heartbeat, only the soft rustle of dresses and the distant hum of the air conditioning filled the silence. Then Daniel's eyes lifted. He looked directly at me. In that instant, I saw the boy who once walked me to school, the brother who whispered promises over coins on our bedroom floor. And I knew what was coming before he even opened his mouth. "I have something to say," Daniel announced, his voice steady, carrying across the hushed ballroom. Gasps erupted. Melissa froze her bouquet, trembling in her grip. The minister blinked in shock. "Mr. Warren." Daniel drew a breath. "I can't do this. Not like this. Not when I'm not being true to myself or to the values my sister and I were raised with." The guests erupted in whispers. Melissa's face twisted with fury. "What are you doing?" she hissed. Daniel turned to her. "I'm sorry, Melissa. You are beautiful and accomplished. You'll make someone very happy someday, but that someone isn't me. I've been trying to mold myself into a man who fits your world. And in the process, I nearly lost the only person who has always stood by me." His gaze found mine again. "I can't betray that. I won't." Melissa's bouquet slipped from her hands, hitting the marble floor with a dull thud. Eleanor shot to her feet, shrieking about reputations and lawsuits. Howard remained curiously calm, as though he'd seen this storm brewing long before. Daniel lifted his chin. "This wedding is canceled." His words rang like a gavel, final and unshakable. "I apologize to all of you who came, but I will not marry someone who asks me to abandon my sister, my values, or myself." The ballroom dissolved into chaos. Melissa sobbed into her mother's arms. Guests whispered behind manicured hands. Vendors froze, unsure what to do. And then Daniel crossed the aisle, walked straight to me, and took my hand. "Come on," he said softly. "Let's go." We slipped out of the ballroom together, leaving the uproar behind. In the quiet of my office, he finally broke down. Half laughing, half crying, he said, "Did you see their faces?" I handed him a glass of water, my own hands trembling. I saw. That was quite an exit. His smile faded. "I'm going to pay for this. Financially, socially." But when the minister asked that question, all I could think about was how Melissa and her mother treated you, how they treated me. And I knew I couldn't say I do. I squeezed his hand. "You chose yourself, Daniel. That took courage." He looked at me, tears streaming freely now. "I learned it from you, the sister who built an empire and never forgot who she was, the hotel girl who taught me what strength really looks like. And in that moment, despite the wreckage we had left behind, I knew we were free. Have you ever witnessed a moment where someone broke free from a gilded cage, even if it meant shattering everything around them? Comment below, I want to know. Because sometimes the bravest act is not walking down the aisle, but walking away. The days that followed felt surreal. Newspapers gossiped about the wedding that wasn't, socialites whispered about Melissa being left at the altar, and rumors twisted the truth into cruel shapes. Yet in the quiet corners of my world, something miraculous was happening. I had my brother back. Daniel returned to his apartment humbled, but strangely lighter. "It feels like I've been holding my breath for months," he admitted during our first Sunday brunch after the chaos. We sat across from each other in a small diner, pancakes steaming between us. Now, I can finally breathe. The fallout was brutal. The Blakes demanded repayment for their portion of the wedding expenses, tens of thousands, spent on florists' gowns, entertainment. Daniel agreed to take responsibility, arranging to pay them back over time. Melissa disappeared into her mother's protection, while Eleanor raged about reputations ruined and alliances wasted. Yet Howard, oddly enough, seemed almost relieved. "You saved yourself," Howard told me one afternoon when he asked to meet privately. "I built my empire by recognizing character. And for what it's worth, you have it. My wife and daughter may have wealth, but you have something more valuable: integrity." Meanwhile, Daniel was rediscovering himself. The construction foreman who once loved late-night beers with his crew began reappearing. He spoke with old friends, dusted off hobbies, and even started smiling again. And then one evening he surprised me. "Remember Sarah from the city planning office?" he asked, his tone almost shy. "Of course," I said, recalling the kind-eyed woman who always seemed genuinely interested in him. "She called to check on me after after everything. We ended up talking for hours, and Nat, it feels different with her, real." I smiled. "She values you for who you are. That's all that matters." Melissa's story took a different turn. Months later, she walked into my office at the Sapphire Grand, stripped of her former arrogance. Wearing jeans and a sweater, her hair pulled back, she handed me a cashier's check. $65,000. "It was wrong of me to keep this," she said quietly. "I came to apologize properly this time." I studied her, searching for signs of manipulation, but her voice was raw, her eyes uncertain. I was so consumed with creating the perfect image that I lost sight of decency. Therapy has helped me see how deeply wrong I was. I nodded slowly. "Apologies don't erase the harm, but they can start healing." She gave a small, grateful smile. "I don't expect forgiveness, I wanted you to know I see it now." It was strange how people could change when stripped of illusion. Strange, too, how life seemed to come full circle. Months later, Daniel and Sarah stood in the garden of my newest hotel, ready to say vows that felt nothing like the spectacle Melissa had demanded. Only close friends and family gathered, laughter filling the air instead of stiff whispers. Daniel asked me to stand beside him, not just as his sister, but as his best woman. As I straightened his tie that morning, he looked at me with tears in his eyes. "You saved me, Nat. Not just from marrying the wrong person, but from losing myself." I squeezed his shoulders. "That's what family does. The real kind, not the kind that values appearances over love." The ceremony was simple, honest. Every word spoken carried weight. Every promise reflected truth. And as Daniel and Sarah exchanged vows, I felt something inside me settle. Because the lesson was clear. Self-worth isn't determined by who accepts you or what circles you manage to enter. It's defined by the boundaries you set and the respect you demand. I had nearly lost my brother. Instead, I found him again. And in the process, I discovered something even more important: myself. So if you've ever faced betrayal, or been told you're not enough, remember this: You cannot control how others treat you, but you can always control what you accept. And sometimes saying no to disrespect is the first step towards saying yes to the life you truly deserve. When I look back now, I realize the wedding that never happened was never really about flowers, gowns, or $65,000. It was a test, a crucible that burned away illusions and left only truth behind. For months I had let myself be diminished. I had smiled while Melissa and Eleanor dismissed me as the hotel girl. I had swallowed hurt while my own brother chose silence. And I had convinced myself that family meant enduring whatever cruelty came just to keep the bond intact. But standing in that conference room, staring down the people who thought they could buy and sell respect, I finally remembered something vital. Self-worth isn't given by others, it is claimed. In the aftermath, life didn't magically smooth out. Daniel still had debts to pay, reputations still carried scars, and I still bore the ache of betrayal. But we also gained something far greater: clarity. Daniel found the courage to walk away from a marriage built on lies. Melissa, against all odds, discovered humility. And I discovered the quiet strength that comes from saying enough. Today, Daniel and I share Sunday brunches again, pancakes, laughter, and conversations about the future, not the past. My hotels thrive, but I've also learned to thrive outside of work. I've built friendships that have nothing to do with business, and I mentor young women who need to hear the same lesson I once did. Your value is not determined by those who fail to see it. So if you take anything from my story, let it be this: never let anyone convince you that you belong only in the shadows while they bask in the light. Sometimes walking away, sometimes saying no is the most loving act you can choose. Because dignity once reclaimed can never be taken again.